Okay, and we're live. So, hi everybody. Thanks for joining us on, this is the 4th edition now of Shape Up Live. And this time we have Ralf Schimmel with us. And Ralf is a technical leader actually, maybe Ralf, you can sort of explain to us kind of what your actual title is and kind of what it means.
Yeah, sure. It's not a title that you hear very often, but my title is Technology Dean. And it stems from the fact that we started obviously as a very small company, and that we didn't want to have any C-level function titles in the beginning. Mm-hmm. So we have a product dean, we have a technology dean, we have a company dean, and they all fulfill their C-level roles by now, as the company has grown to about 60 people. Mm-hmm. However, yeah. So my personal role is that I'm, if you want to put it in general terms, I'm the CTO of the company.
Got it. And then can you tell us a little bit about what's the company and what does the company do?
Yeah. So the company started about 10 years ago, and they found that there was a problem with the digital whiteboards that were brought into classrooms. And the biggest problem with them was that it was hardware driven and not very software driven. So the software that came with the digital whiteboards was very clumsy, difficult to use, which resulted in the fact that these interactive whiteboards turned up as, well, expensive beamers instead of the touch interfaces that they were supposed to be. So Gynzy got into that and built a product in Flash back then to have a very user-friendly interface on the interactive whiteboards.
So was it a hardware product or a software product or both?
No, very software. So it's a software company, and the software was meant to be independent of the hardware it was running on.
I see. And then you interfaced with like the major brands of hardware that were out there at the time?
Yeah, so the smart boards, for example, one of the big brands that's out there, work perfectly with Gynzy.
I see. And is it still a kind of thing where like it's hardware and software together? It's not a pure software thing. Like you have to have the hardware to use it, right?
Yeah. So by now the market changed quite a bit, and the software is used in different ways. So this year, actually, we put our Flash environment completely to rest, and we have a completely new product in HTML5, which obviously also works on any device right now, and that kind of gave us the opportunity to make it less bound to the hardware. So it's actually the same, but not in Flash.
I see. Yeah, interesting. And sorry, was it 60 people? You said how many people are in the company now?
Yeah, so the company now is about 60 people. We have a small team in the US, and a bigger team in the Netherlands that's serving the market in the Netherlands and in Belgium. So that's our main focus.
How does that 60 kind of break down in terms of role and who does what?
We have about 15 developers. So that's a mix of backend, front end. We have about 15 people who do customer success and support. We only have one person in UX right now. We had two, but it's back down to one currently, which is a problem. But we can talk a bit more about that later, because it's an interesting thing compared to the way you guys work, I think. Well, there's a finance team, there's a sales team, so that's about 7 or 8 people. The management team is 4 people.
I see.
And we have about 10 people, I think, who do content creation, so create actual lessons that can be used on the digital whiteboard.
Interesting.
And also create exercises. So it's a great mix of people. And so the company started as a digital whiteboard product, and about 6 years ago we started a second product, you could say. We also completely started it besides the other product, completely focused on students. And so it's more of an adaptive learning platform where students can learn the different lessons that the teacher teaches, and they can do exercises on their own level at their own pace.
Who's the buyer?
The buyer is the school.
The school,
Yeah.
And is that the same? Is that the same for the content product as it is with the software product?
Yeah, so they're tied together. So you actually you buy a license for for Gynzy, which gives you the digital whiteboard and the content. That's a teacher license, and you can also buy a license for a student, and that gives the student the option to learn on the platform as well.
I see. And does every buyer get the same product, or do you do customization depending on for different schools?
No, it's very product oriented. So it's a single product for right now it's about 80,000 teachers and somewhere over 1 million students that are using it.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so where when does ShapeUp come into the picture?
So we, like I said, about 6 years ago, we started to develop the second part of the product for the students, which was a pretty big investment and a pretty big new product development. And there we started with traditional Scrum.
Mm-hmm.
So we had the traditional Scrum teams, multifunctional teams that had their backlog and do whatever a Scrum team does.
Mm-hmm.
We had a product manager, which was me back then. And we kind of just, with the educational team and the developers, tried to come up with a proper roadmap to build a product. And it was pretty classic. I think we did that for about 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any UX person at that time?
Yeah, we had 3 back then. Yeah.
Okay. And how, help me, can you paint the picture of kind of like, what did it mean for you to be doing product management? Like where is the work coming from? Like the work that you might do, where does that come from? And who was turning it into kind of actionable work and deciding like what was going to happen on a sprint by sprint basis?
Yeah. So actually we were second mover in the Dutch market with a specific product. So there was one company before us who did something that was successful. We were talking about it for quite a while, and we figured that it was a good thing for us to do as well. So we had a pretty clear goal of what the product should do, and that's actually where we started from. So before that, we did some interviews, but we knew that what the product had to do, at least the minimum version of it. And that's actually where we started from. So we gave ourselves, I think it's about a year of development time, both content and product. And after that, I think the first 40 schools went live with the product. And from there, with all the user input, we kept on improving the product day by day.
And when you were in the Scrum world, if you got some kind of a feedback from users, how did you turn that into? I'm guessing since you were in a Scrum world, eventually it became something like a ticket or a story, or like what can you sort of what's in that world? Like, what did the path from like user says this to like developer is doing this? Like, what did that look like?
So it's very. So I think the biggest part of the backlogs that were there were driven by our own ideas, and not necessarily the things that came back from our users, because we had a pretty clear picture of what it had to do in the beginning. That obviously changed a lot as soon as we got more users, and that gave us the opportunity to do more with that. And I think that's one of the strong things of Gynzy, and especially the Gynzy that started 10 years ago, that it's a completely user-driven development roadmap. So our end users define a lot of what the product eventually did, and still did. However, this product was pretty big, and to put the first version in place was not something that we could regularly ask our users. And so it was
Yep.
It only took place after the product was getting used. And I think back then it was mostly interruptive of the development process. So if there was something that we said, okay, the users are asking for this, then we just put it in place if we felt it was important enough.
Mm-hmm.
And then it ended up in a backlog. And
I see. And then when it came time to like deciding like what goes out of the backlog into actually scheduled work, was that like your decision, or was that something that you did like together with other deans, or how did that work?
So what we tried to do is that we went in front of a huge whiteboard, which had all the big tickets, the big features on Post-its on the wall. We had the entire team there, so all the developers and the educational people, and we kind of together did a Moscow to define what we wanted to do. So that was a pretty big decision process, and we took about 3 or 4 hours to get that done. And we did that every couple of months to define the top of the backlog.
I see. Okay. And so when did you have the first thought that like you should maybe look for some way to do things differently?
So the first thing we did was after about 3 years, when we felt that it was difficult for user feedback to reach the product, but also for the relation of support, for example. So questions come in, how does technical support reach a developer or somebody who has enough experience? How do you prevent that it interrupts a lot and a lot of people? So we started looking for solutions, and what we came up with was that we really liked the way Spotify modeled their organization. And you probably heard this a lot in these interviews, but so we went to smaller teams and we made them domain driven. So we defined, I think, about 20 domains and about 6 or 7 small teams, 2 or 3 developers, and they had like a couple of domains which they were responsible for.
And was this led by, with this change toward the Spotify model, was this led by a particular person in your team? Was it you? Was it somebody else? Like, how did this start?
Yeah, so it was me and a colleague who's actually the product dean, and together we kind of try to keep the teams.
I see.
And
who raised the issue first? Like, who you know what I mean? Like, where does the hand come up and say like we've got to do things differently? Where did it actually start?
I think this part, I think it started from the fact that we had a feeling that we were not pushing out enough new stuff, so that we kind of were stuck in a mode of working which didn't make of the company what it could be by then.
And was it always like that, or did it change?
No, it changed, and I think it changed between the fact that you're developing a product from scratch and you have a pretty clear horizon of where you want to go, up to the part when you have a product, and how do you decide what you do next? With a backlog that's huge. So that, in combination with the fact that you get a lot of user feedback, and what we did is that we had the small squads, as we call them, and each squad had a squad leader, and the squad leader was also responsible for picking his own things. So he was responsible for his domains, but not only for the fact that it should be working properly, but also for defining what should be next in those domains.
Okay. So in a way, it sounds a little bit like distributing the product management in a way.
Yeah, that's what we try to do. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so you adopt the Spotify model, and then what happens next?
So this worked well, and it worked pretty well, and it was driven from the fact that we wanted to give people a lot of autonomy, a lot of freedom within the company to make their own choices and to bring the product further. We had a product master, so that's the title that we gave him to prevent that he had the right to say what had to be done. But he did keep a good eye out of the entire product, very good oversight of all the things that we were doing. And he was the person who delivered the most input from our customers towards the squad masters.
Okay. And did you start to see the speed up in like shipping new things that you wanted to see?
Yeah, I think it helped quite a bit from the situation we were before. Probably also because we had smaller teams, and the smaller teams that resulted also in a lot less communication overhead within the specific domains, but also a lot less knowledge sharing, which could be an issue on its own.
So why not just stick with the Spotify model forever and say, okay, we solved it? Like what came to your attention that now like there was something else to change?
Yeah, so we had a couple of big things coming up, and one of them was that we had to get rid of the old Flash environment and migrate those 80,000 teachers to the new product. And the new product was not what the old product was. I mean, it evolved into something else, something better in what we think of it. But yeah, tell that to a user. That's difficult.
Yeah. So you needed them to be on a different product because of kind of your infrastructure needs, like because you wanted to be on a different technology stack. So it's like you want to get rid of this legacy. You didn't want to support the legacy stuff anymore.
Well, it was Flash, so we didn't have a lot of.
Oh, it wasn't your choice. I see. It was kind of. I understand. I see.
It was a long time coming. We kind of pushed it forward long enough, and now we did it. But we only have 4 months left until they, I think, Chrome completely disables it.
That must have been stressful.
We've been working on it a long time, so we knew what we had. The stressful part was, I think, the fact that we actually turned off the switch of the old environment, and we knew that a lot of users, about 40%, was still using the old product.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a big possibility of breakage there for users who didn't expect what they were getting.
And where are we in time now? When was this happening?
So we flipped the switch the start of this school year. So that was in August.
Just recently. Okay.
Just recently, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So and when we started thinking about working the way ShapeUp works was when we had a couple of big projects, and this is one of them. But this is a software company running for 10 years, has quite some legacy. So we had a couple of big things that we had to do. And we wanted to be able to run projects cross-team, because every now and then you need or more people or different knowledge within the team. So we introduced projects and we created cross-team teams.
Like going across the squads, like across these domain specific groups.
Yeah. So we did that for a couple of things, and actually, so based on the fact that I read the book back then and thought it was a pretty good idea to try it and not to fully implement ShapeUp, but to see how it would work. And that went pretty good.
How did you come across the book?
That's a good question.
Did you find it on your own, or did somebody bring it to you?
No, I think it's probably Twitter. Maybe Dave.
And okay, reading a book takes time. Like why? Yeah. What did you see? What did you see that made you think like this is worth some time?
Well, I guess the subtitle is pretty clear. Huh? The shipping part.
Yeah. But I thought you had fixed that.
So fix that. So I got to take maybe one small step back. So we had the squads and the autonomy. We had the product master who was filling the backlogs of the teams, and they could pick what they wanted to do. So that worked, but it didn't give us the focus on the big things that we wanted to do. So we could not get out the bigger features that we wanted to build. Because it's very easy to push them backwards.
Yeah.
And there are always a ton of small things that you can do that solve an issue for 10 or 100 or 1,000 users that have immediate result, maybe in 2 days or in 5 days. So what was happening was that I think that was a big part of it. And so we had a lot of big things and big wishes still there. Which was also the reason why we started thinking about doing it completely different. That's one part of it. The other part of it is that the role of the product master, we didn't want it to be a classic Scrum product manager role, but it kind of turned up like that because the squad masters had a lot of faith in the product master.
Okay, hold on. This is a stupid question, but like what's wrong with the traditional Scrum product manager role? You said you didn't want that. Like, why not?
I called it, and not necessarily because of the person, but I called it the role itself a single point of failure within the product and organization. Because the influence of what happens on the product roadmap or what the teams are actually gonna develop is strongly influenced by the person who defines what on the roadmap. And I used to be that person for a while, so I can speak out of experience that if I wanted something to be done because I liked it, I could push it. Me personally.
Yeah.
I think that's perfect if you are in a small team, you know what you want to build. However, if you have a big company with a lot of users and a lot of feedback, then the distribution of that knowledge, but also of the decision power, sounds like a very smart thing to do.
Interesting. Distributing the decision power. Was this something that you had already kind of thought through, like before reading Shape Up? This idea of like somehow spreading out the decision making.
So we kind of tried it by giving a lot of power to the squad masters. Like I said, they had a product plus they had a technical background, so they were developers, but they also had the power to choose what they were going to develop. And we also held them responsible for knowing what the market wanted from them. Okay. So that means that we ended up with 6 or 7 people who we expected that from. But the problem was that it wasn't happening enough. If I asked them, did you talk to any clients? Did you go to any schools? Then most of the times that didn't happen because they were very involved in what they were developing and not necessarily in why they were developing it or for who they were developing it.
Would it be fair to say, was it the kind of thing where like there's just so much work to be done just to do the development that there wasn't kind of extra space and time to go talk to customers and stuff like that? Or was it more about interest? Like,
it's maybe a combination. So it's we kind of pushed that role upon them, and they liked it when we talked about it. However, doing it when you're a hardcore developer, it's maybe not in your nature to step outside of that your natural behavior in development and actually go to schools and figure out what should be next.
Yeah, it's almost like a different job, like a different skill set and a different personality type and all kinds of things.
Yeah, it is. So so I think the fact that we ended up with that, it was a good step for us, and a lot of knowledge was shared there, and we did great things. So there are no regrets there.
Yep.
However, if you look where we are right now, so we migrated the 10-year-old product to a new product in a new technology stack, same product, new stack, which meant we had to completely write it from scratch and start over.
Wow.
So there were a lot of things that we we could not do, because in 10 years you can build a lot, but if you rebuild the product, you have to choose what you will do and what you won't do.
Yeah.
So right now we're in the state where we migrated the product. However, our users are still missing a lot of content, and if you look at the backlogs of the teams, then it's huge. There's a roadmap. There's a backlog for each team for probably 2 years if we don't do anything. So we could lean back and think, okay, that's fine. We'll have the same product as we had. We just wait for 2 years and develop every wish that's out there. And that kind of drove us towards thinking, how can we do this differently?
So so if I have this right, is this like you've kind of gone through? Had you already gone through all of this? Most of the work of kind of migrating and rewriting the new product before you started to try ShapeUp?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the new product is ready, and now the question is, you have is it a question of like, well, how are we going to like, what's the question about looking ahead? You mentioned that you've got this giant backlog, and that if you just kept working for 2 years, that you could kind of like fill in all of the holes, of the old stuff that didn't get migrated over. But like, something's wrong with that. You don't want to just kind of fill in all the holes for the next 2 years. Like what's wrong with that?
Yeah. So because we have two products, the teacher product and the student product, and they obviously are very tied together. But a teacher can only use the teacher product if he wants to, and can skip the student part. So that's kind of an extra for us. It's a big upsell commercial wise, so it's very interesting for us to have students active in the platform as well. But it are two different products, and the product for the students is we can do a lot there, because the students create millions of exercises. They do, so we get millions of exercises every day. Which result in very interesting data. We want to show results to teachers. It's a complex product as a total. And then there's the digital whiteboard, which is also technology wise very interesting. It can do a lot of things. It's very difficult to keep that user friendly, but we can do a lot. We could spend 2 years just continuing development only on the digital whiteboard and all the interactive content there, which would stop us from growing on the other side.
I see. So is the question about, is the question like, how are we going to choose like what to spend time on?
Definitely. Yeah.
I see. Okay. And was ShapeUp supposed to help with that?
Yeah. So the way we looked at it was like, okay, what if we throw away the backlogs, like you suggest, no backlogs. There's a lot of knowledge there, but there's also a lot of weight there on your shoulders that you're dragging with you. And we start with a clean slate, and we figure out what's currently most important for our customers. And that's actually what we did. So we started with an empty page, and we started to come up with the biggest ideas that we had, the biggest pitches, and some things obviously were coming from backlogs, where huge epics were with tens of different tickets to the epics that described a beautiful part of the product that we shaped into a pitch.
Okay. And when you shaped something into a pitch, was the rest of the development process kept the same as before? So was this more about deciding what to do as opposed to how the teams actually did their development and executed?
No, from there. So we took not enough time, I think, but we took some time to restructure actually, and to completely start with ShapeUp. So we just finished our first cycle, so it's all very very fresh.
Okay.
So the the product master got the role of the product strategist, as you call him in the book. Or a product strategist. We put all the developers actually together and said, okay, so there is an idea that we start working with ShapeUp. I did a presentation to the entire development team, what it was, what I thought it could mean for the company as well, and how they felt about it. And there was a very positive vibe there. So that kind of opened the way to actually start doing it. So from there, with the product strategist, with the educational team, a lot of time was spent on defining a first set of pitches. So I think 7 or 8 pitches were completely worked out for the first betting table. And from there we did it like in the book.
Okay. Who did you bring together to do pitches? Like, are pitches like who created the pitches, and what role were they in?
So that's one of the things that's very different from how you describe it, and I think an interesting topic to discuss on. So one of the things that we also felt that was missing was that not all the feedback from our customers ended up in the product, meaning that we have the customer success team that talk to teachers every day and hear a lot of their pain and a lot of the successes as well, luckily for us, but also the pain, and how do we get that pain into the product, into pitches. So that's one part of it that we felt it was missing, a lot of knowledge within the company, within people in the company that didn't end up in the product. So from there we said we want them to be able to give their ideas. So we kind of opened up input for the pitches to the entire company. So we just put up a page that everybody could put in their idea, their rough ideas, and some were worked out more than others. And we gave everybody the opportunity to spend time on that. So we said, if you have an idea, please tell us what problem you're trying to solve. So be sure to validate that you're actually solving a problem before you come with a solution. Don't spend too much time, but spend some time for yourself on thinking what you're doing there. So the beginning of the shaping process. But at least make sure that that the company knows which problems are out there.
Okay. And how did that go? What happened?
So right now we have a huge list of ideas and pitches. So that's very interesting. We also chose to make this process completely transparent. So it's open to the entire company. I think that's different from how you describe it in the book, right? Are you still there?
We've gone through. Yeah. Sorry, we had a connection.
You back, Ryan?
I think I'm back.
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, that was weird. I all of a sudden had a DNS issue. Like nothing, like my internet dropped and nothing would resolve. And but the iPad kept working, so I just restarted, and now we're back. So okay, mysteries of computers. So sorry about that. So you were just saying how you invited everybody to do pitches to share their rough ideas, actually, and you really got a ton. You got a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, and that obviously that was the goal of it. So that's good, and that's why we said we adopt Shape Up in its full way, how it's meant to be, and then we start fine tuning it to our organization. However, we have this one big wish that we want more input from our company, from the people within our company, to end up in the product. So that's why we said we'll open that up. And we'll give everyone the ability to work with product strategists or with a developer if they need them to work out a solution to a problem that they found.
Got it. Okay, so just to kind of bring us to a kind of a wrap up all of this, I think all this context makes it much easier to get into the questions, because then otherwise it's like I have no idea what what situation you're in. So what actually happened then with your first cycle? Like, how did it go? What worked and what didn't? And where are you now versus where you were before?
So we chose a couple of pitches, and a couple of interesting things were there. So a couple of pitches were very clear, and we had no issues betting on them. We knew that there were big wishes from our users. One of the big things that we have been pushing forward for 2 years without doing it. So those were pretty easy. Others were more involved into cleaning up legacy. So cleaning up legacy from the old product, so backends that were still functional but had to be replaced, those kind of things. and that was a bit of a difficult subject. It was like nobody really knew how big and hairy the problem was. And it was put in a pitch, and the pitch said, okay, we're probably going to do this, and we're probably not going to do this. But it was very difficult to bet on. However, we had no choice because we had to solve those problems. So that was an interesting thing. And what we did there is we said, okay, we're just going to use the first 2 cycles, and we're just going to dedicate that time to 3 or 4 people to fully work on getting that resolved.
Okay. And I should ask, are these 6-week cycles, or how long is a cycle?
Yeah, there are 6-week cycles with a 2-week cooldown in the middle. Yeah.
Okay, so when you said that you decided that you would dedicate the first 2 cycles for 2 to 4 people just to work on that legacy stuff, does that mean like there's almost like a track where like this small team gets its own sort of bets for cycles, and you're basically saying like we have enough appetite for the next 2 cycles that this team is just going to continue working on this legacy stuff, and then we're going to shape kind of separate projects of new stuff for the rest of the available people?
Yeah, that's correct. So that's eventually the solution we came up with. This was a bit difficult because we didn't have enough time in before we started the first cycle to completely get into what had to be done. So that's why we said, okay, we're just going to dedicate this time. The appetite is big because we have to solve this. So we'll just put a deadline on 2 cycles.
I see. Okay. Any results from the first cycle, or is it all just kind of still a question mark hanging in the air?
No, actually, pretty good results. We had some demos today, and it was very nice. So we had through 3 pitches that have been completed. All of them went into overtime in the cooldown. So that's actually one of the questions that came up from the squad. Like, how bad is it that you have to finish your product in overtime? And what do you do with it? Obviously, you try to prevent it because the cooldown is there for a reason. But this first cycle, it was either we didn't scope hard enough in the beginning of the cycles, which is also something that one of the teams mentioned. Or the deadline is, you start looking at the deadline too late. So that's something that's out there, but all the teams went over. However, so 3 of the pitches were completed, and actually the team that we gave 2 cycles got a lot done in the back end. So what we're going to do in the next betting table is to see what the best people would be to bring that home, which means a lot more front end work and a lot less back end work. So we're going to move around.
That's cool. So now that you have a big pool of people to choose from, you can kind of rearrange on 6 weeks at a time to get the most effective combination for where you want to go next.
And that's definitely a huge plus from this way of working. Yeah,
I see. That's cool. So this thing about like the pitches going into overtime, how much overtime did they go into? Was it like the whole 2 weeks of cooldown was needed, or just like a little part of the cooldown? What happened there?
So we're now at the end of the first week of the cooldown, and I think that 2 of the 3 products are completely live, and they are, well, some of them are like doing finishing touches, adding functionality that they scoped out and they liked, so they're adding it themselves. And one of the teams is almost done. I think they have to wrap up on Monday, and then they're done. So it's not bad for the first cycle.
That's not bad at all. So I think one thing is, like, your question was like, how bad is it to go into overtime? And I would definitely say that for the first cycle, it's understandable that it would leak over a little bit like that into the first week. In the long run, it's very unhealthy to allow it to go into cooldown, because eventually people will learn that deadlines don't mean anything. And if the deadline doesn't mean anything, then it doesn't motivate them to make the trade-offs that they have to make. I think both of the issues that you raised sound like the team is already kind of sensitive to the right things. You mentioned that like some people said that maybe you didn't scope hard enough. And the other thing that came up was maybe they didn't they weren't reacting to the deadline early enough. And I think this point that you mentioned about sort of being aware of the deadline from the very first day of the 6 weeks, this I think is a when I think of our best practitioners at Basecamp, that's what they do. They the minute they start to work on something in the very first day of the cycle, they're already kind of pushing back on it to say, is that the most important thing? Is it the riskiest thing? Is it, is there anything we can remove from it? What's the minimum that we have to do to figure out what's going to work? And then how do we move on to the next scariest thing? I think this could be a whole book in itself. And I've only started to learn kind of how important this is, or to appreciate. We've been doing it kind of instinctively for years, but I'm starting to realize that like sequencing, choosing the order of what to work on is just as important as scoping. Scoping is like, how far do you go before you stop, and sequencing is like, what's first and what's second and what's third. And what can happen sometimes is that the teams sort of choose things that are, more or less easy to work on in the beginning to kind of just get started. And it's very important to dive like straight into the middle and choose the weirdest, hardest, scariest thing that has the most unknowns in it as the first thing to get over the hill.
That's interesting, because probably because I think you also mentioned that in the book, in terms of start with the most difficult thing, making sure that if you have to pull the plug on the pitch, that you can do it early, right?
Yeah. The whole thing is just that we want to. I think our natural human instinct, especially if we are delivering work for somebody else, is that we want to show them that we're succeeding. So we take the things that we're a little bit maybe sometimes worried about or we don't know how to do, and we kind of push them to the side, and then we do all the things that we know how to do. And we really have to consciously. The thing about the deadline is pushing the team. It's creating this pressure for them where they should actually allow themselves to experience this uncomfortable feeling of like, we have to actually look at like, what do we not know? And then whatever it is that we don't know, like we have to do that first. The less we understand it, the more early we have to do it.
Yeah.
And then there's this, and then once you also kind of start working on something hard, you can get the feeling that like, okay, this might have a lot of implementation detail, or there might be some legacy systems that this touches, or who knows what comes up. And it's good to feel all of that complexity very early in the project, because it's funny, we always forget how hard things are. Like every time we go and we build a login screen, then we feel like, oh, programming is easy. And then we have to like change the way that some existing system works. And then we're like, oh, I remember. This is always harder than I think it is, And so we're really trying to consciously front load that stuff.
Yeah, that's very interesting. All right, so and it goes against your nature to do this, obviously. So it has to. So did this grow on people in your team?
Yeah. So what we noticed actually was that we have like 20 years of history now, and we noticed that this was something that we were doing instinctively when we were very small. And this was just because Jason and David had kind of led us and created the culture, because they had the instincts to work like that. We at the time we called it epicenter design when we wrote the first. When Jason and David did the first book, Getting Real, it was all about like start in the middle, of the juiciest thing, more or less, and we didn't really frame it in terms of knowns and unknowns at that time, but it was something that we understood. And then what actually happened was, fast forward, I don't know, 10 years, and we were bigger, we had hired some new people, and we actually had a project where we had a designer working on the project, and we got to the end of the project. The project did not finish in the cycle. And we looked at it and we said, well, what's not done here? And this is the other thing about going over time. There's a huge difference between being at the end of the 6 weeks and you have an unknown that's not finished, versus if you get to the end of the 6 weeks and it's just like some screws that you have to tighten, right?
Yeah.
And what we discovered was that like this newer hire had left a very substantial problem for the end. And someone who had been there from the beginning wouldn't have done that, would have said like, look, I've got to have an answer to this earlier, because as you know, like if it's an unknown, it could be an infinite unknown. Like it could be an unsolvable thing. Like you need to know like what you're going to do about that thing. And so what we discovered was that actually this was kind of where the hill chart came from, was we needed a way to communicate, is this an unknown or is this something that we know how to do? And what we basically wanted to help the teams to understand who hadn't been there from the beginning was that this was something we were always doing, but we never had a metric. And until you have a metric, you kind of can't externalize a thought process, And so unless you can look over someone's shoulder, but also we were remote, so that makes it difficult too. I think osmosis is probably a very viable way as well, just being next to somebody. But the whole idea of the hill chart was that it was a metric for this exact danger. And then what we discovered was that we could encourage everybody, and this was very natural because we were kind of already doing it, but it allowed us to articulate it, was that no matter what you're doing, it always starts with not knowing what you're doing. And so every piece of work starts uphill, even if you think you know what it is. Yeah. And this thing where we made it about the work and not about the people. It's not that you don't know what to do because you are a stupid person. It's like all work is unknown, and it's in the work that it's not known. It's not your lack of ability or skill or knowledge or whatever. And so this makes it very like impersonal, and it makes it also standard. So I think the hill chart is a really effective way to turn the culture around, because it makes it so it's not personal anymore, and it just makes it as like a fact of problem solving, that we're going to go through this phase at the beginning of everything we do. Yeah.
So if I can squeeze in a question here.
Yeah, sure. We didn't get to enough questions, so let's take. If you have time, I have time. We can do a few more.
All right, great. So how do you prevent that in the beginning of the cycle? Okay, so one of the big things we just talked about is that start with the biggest, hairiest problem within the pitch, and try to solve that before you do anything else. Mm-hmm. But how do you prevent that the technical team that is developing it? I mean, they are, like you said, their general success factor is that they finish this pitch. Mm-hmm. So they are involved in a way that they won't give up easily.
Of course, and that's by design, because the thing is that we are it should be solvable if it was bet on. There is technical work that you do in shaping. Shaping isn't just wishing, and betting isn't just hoping. Like you can spike the technical work before you make the bet to validate that that it's actually not terribly tangled, or there is some way to go about it. So really, a lot of this has to do with de-risking the work as much as you can before you give it to the team, because the team should actually have the assumption that everything that was bet on is possible in this period of time, because like Ralf looked at it, or whatever, or some senior person, you know what I mean? Like, and this is a very critical part of shaping, is actually looking at the interdependencies and the risk factors and having an answer to those, because actually, in a way, not having an answer to a foundational hard technical piece, like that's still unshaped. Part of actually being shaped is that you have answers that close the system for all the hard questions.
Okay. without touching too much on the actual solution and implementation,
because there's levels of solution, and if you can have the main architectural tent poles of like, yes, this is possible because the current system has this API and that endpoint and this module here, and then we can replace that here. You know what I mean? Like, it's 4 or 5 key points, and out of that there are a million small decisions that have to be made, but they are within the boundaries of that structure, So this is something that you can build an intuition for, and this is honestly the real secret, I think, of shaping and betting, is this weird, very hard to talk about relationship between like the boundaries and what's possible, and then all the details and like what we're not worried about, but will indeed require a great deal of work and thought and creativity still.
Okay, so I have two follow-ups on that. The first one is, so how does a team pull the plug? I mean, they want to finish the pitch.
Yeah.
So is there continuous connection between the person who wrote the pitch, or was most involved with the pitch, writing the pitch, and shaping the pitch? Is he in continuous contact with the team building the pitch and trying to help them make the decision to pull the plug?
The way that this, we call it the circuit breaker in the book. And the reason that we call it a circuit breaker is because the circuit breaker is something that goes off automatically when the system has too much electrical load. So the idea actually is that nobody decides to pull the plug, ever. The plug gets pulled by default when the cycle is over and the work isn't done.
Okay.
So this way, the team can focus all of their energy toward creativity. Like, that didn't work. What else could we do? That didn't work. Can we rethink the pitch? Is there some way we can do it? Now, if for some reason in the first week of the cycle or the second week of the cycle, the team encountered a complete stone boulder in the way that there's no solution at all, and nobody saw it and it's just impossible, then it would be reasonable to say, look, I think this isn't possible. Like, let's reconsider what we're doing for this cycle. In practice, I have never seen that happen.
Okay.
Like, it's very rare for that to happen, that it's just simply impossible and there was something that we didn't see. Usually the team can transform. They take their understanding of what they're trying to do and they just do the best that they can. So David would always say, there's some version of the pitch that's doable within the 6 weeks. And then the team takes the freedom that they have, the autonomy that they have, to figure out what that some version is. And it's really the betting table in an ideal situation, the betting table is the only time that the management should have to put their attention on the team to what happened, because they've really been left alone for the 6 weeks. In practice, if you have a senior person who is involved in the betting or the shaping, and they have the time and interest to check in with the team, then that could be an extra support for the team to do that. But by design, that's not there's no step in ShapeUp that says, and now the manager checks in, and this is the moment when the team talks to the manager. Actually, the hill charts are meant to be sort of self-serve for the manager, so they can detect if the team is stuck or not. So I've had a lot of situations where I've looked at hill charts, I've noticed they weren't moving, and then I assumed that there was a problem in the work. And again, this is where we talk about like the problem in the team versus problem in the work. So I assume that there's a tangle somewhere, and then I approached the team and said, hey, is there anything that we could look at together? I noticed that this thing seems to be stuck, and this allows them, actually, they don't have to say I'm stuck, which is nice. And I can approach them to say, maybe there's something about the work that's confusing. And then we workshop it together as collaborators. And then we can, sometimes it's just a problem actually in the scoping. Sometimes it's a problem in the way that they define the edges of what's in a scope versus a different scope. Sometimes it's a technical thing or a design hurdle. It can be anything. But we look at it that way, very ad hoc. to support the team. But the circuit breaker is just something that fires at the end of the 6 weeks.
Yeah, and at the same time, the reason why you don't go overtime, because
exactly, because you know that if you reach that point, it's going to fire, right?
Yeah,
and that's what you don't want. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I would like to touch back on the fact that, like I told you, we tried to implement ShapeUp, or we actually implemented ShapeUp with a form of radical transparency and a lot of input of the entire company.
Yes.
I think it's a great start, and we have a lot of ideas and a lot of involvement within the company, which really gives it a good vibe to it.
That's excellent. Yep. Mm-hmm.
However, so well, I'd just like to hear your opinion on this.
Yeah,
so,
this is hard. There's also social aspects to this and functional aspects to this. A lot of it is actually, there is a lot of social aspect to it, which is that we want everyone to feel part of the team together, and making this transition to putting up a wall feels very socially uncomfortable, So that's part of it. And of course, there's good functional reasons to have input from the team, because they do have knowledge that we don't have. My experience with this has been that, well, here's what I saw at Basecamp. In the beginning, before we had kind of codified ShapeUp, Jason invited everybody in the company to write pitches. And not only to suggest ideas, but actually to write the pitches. Mm-hmm. And what we discovered was very similar to what you were describing earlier in our conversation. If somebody's a programmer, they're good at programming, and they also have a responsibility to do a lot of programming, and they don't have time. A, they don't have time to talk to customers, and B, they don't have time to learn how to talk to customers and how to turn that into a problem definition that's actionable and so on.
Yeah.
That's for an example from a programmer. The same is true from a customer support person. The customer support person their job is to be talking to customers all the time. They don't actually have the time or even interest or background or whatever it is to stop talking to customers and start learning about problem definition according to product design. And what is a good definition of a problem? This is actually also very, very difficult to do, because you're going against the grain of all of the background and knowledge and incentives that this person has. Now, you might be pleasantly surprised that there are some people who are natural at it, or they manage to create the time for it, or you can try to allow, somehow structure time for it. But in my experience, you're just going against the grain with this whole thing of asking them to do this work. So what we discovered was that actually it led to it in the beginning, it felt good socially, but in the end it led to frustration, because what happened was the invitation to submit ideas wasn't leading to shipping those ideas in the future. And then this actually hurt the social relationship, because it diminishes the trust, because basically it says
more unheard. Yeah.
Exactly. It says, well, now I've told you everything, and now you still didn't do it, so you must really not care what I think, right? Or I don't know, but something like that. What we discovered was that inviting everyone to pitch didn't work. The place that I've landed on that feels good for me now is I do regular one-on-ones with our data person and with our head of customer support, and so like maybe once every 2 cycles or something like that, I'll have a one-on-one with, for example, with Kristen, who heads our support, and she has an open. We just talk about anything. There's no agenda. And anything that she thinks is important, I feel like I have a chance to hear about it now. And I'm not asking her anything of her time other than this hour to talk, And I feel like if she raises something I would like to be able to ask her follow-up questions and really understand what she's seen and heard and what her experience is. And then I can go do the thing that I know how to do, which is to shape a solution. And then that to me feels like a very healthy sort of like separation of responsibility, you know? For me, I see this now as actually my responsibility to do this both with customers and internally. So for example, I do quite regular customer interviews because then I have a direct input to my shaping process of what customers value and don't value. But for example, I'm working on a feature idea for Basecamp 4. I was actually having a one-on-one with Jane. She raised an issue with Basecamp because she uses it differently in her role as a data analyst as opposed to the people doing product development. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And so then what I did was I just did an open invitation for everybody in the company who might be interested in this particular subject to have a one-on-one call with me. And then I had maybe, I don't know, 6 people who volunteered. And then I interviewed them about their experiences with this problem. And then I felt like I had a very rich input that I really think is the best the best representation possible of like what the company cared about on this matter, because I did an open invitation. Anybody who cares about this subject, come talk to me, you know, and then listen to everybody, use some interview techniques that I know about, and then took that as an input to the shaping process. And I feel I really like this approach of many one-on-one conversations that allow anything to come up. And that way, no matter what it is, people can raise it. And then it also creates an opportunity for them to prioritize. If their raw ideas just go into a survey and then someone else has to prioritize those, then all of the prioritizing work lands on one central person. On the other hand, if they have a chance to talk for an hour with somebody who's kind of a decision maker or who has an influence on what gets built, they are naturally going to prioritize which things are most important to discuss in that hour. So this is kind of the same principle as the 6-week cycle. It's using the time box to encourage people to make trade-offs.
Yeah.
So then what happens is I feel like if I talk to somebody for an hour once every 2 cycles, whatever's most important, I'm going to know. You know what I mean? And if anything comes up for them, they also know that they can bring it up. Now, of course, it's not a perfect system. I might talk to somebody and say, "Oh, that's a perfect idea, and I totally understand it. Let's do it." But I'm not the final decision maker either. You know what I mean? And Jason might have some like amazing new idea that nobody thought of that becomes the priority because, you know, like, it comes from vision. It came from he had a eureka in the morning, and it's the best idea, and it's just like that. You know what I mean? So there's still no guarantees, but it's actually promising the conversation, you know, than just accepting the submission of the idea.
Yeah. Oh, all right. That's very interesting. I think we can learn a lot from that. And cool. It's good to know that you guys started in the same way where we are currently starting, because it's kind of getting a feeling for also the amount of work it is to write a pitch, and like you say, it has to be good. So
yep.
Well, after this first cycle,
a pitch is a very high value thing. This is like a pitch is like literally like how the company is going to spend its time for the next 6 weeks. This is like there's a lot of pressure to shape it well.
Yeah, well, this is a great thing, and I think this is interesting to also talk with our product strategist to see how he can use this. Okay, so
one thing that may be a subtle point, but I think it might be helpful to think about too, is just that I find it very helpful to think of a pitch as a deliverable in terms of like it's the format, but the shaping is actually the work of creating the pitch. So it's really more about the like shaping is the work, and pitching is just kind of delivering it and trying to sell it.
Right. Okay. So how do you choose what you're going to shape? I mean, is your process, so you get a lot of input in the one-on-ones that you use with your customers and internally. Do you use a data-driven process as well, like the number of votes on a feature, or I don't know?
No, we don't. We don't use any data-driven processes. I like to use data as a. I use data sometimes as a way. I invite the data to prove me wrong about something. So, because that's actually all data can do anyway. The statisticians say it failed to what was it like? Nothing can tell you if it's true. It can only tell you if it invalidated your hypothesis, the null. If I'm working on an idea, I might run some data or ask Jane for help to look at data. But I only expect that the data is going to show me that my assumption was completely wrong. That's the best it can do. It can't tell me what to do. It can only tell me what not to do, which is very important. This is fundamental. When it comes to what to do, I think of it as having two inputs. I've got a demand side input, which is like, what are the things based on my understanding of the market where there's the most opportunity? So where are people struggling the most? What are they trying to do that they can't? Where are they failing and then leaving? Stuff like that. So that's the demand side input. And then there's the supply side input of what do Jason and David care about? What do they want Basecamp to be? There's problems that Jason and David aren't interested in solving, no matter how much money there is behind that problem, because that's not the kind of thing that they want to work on. And that's a huge thing for them. And so for me, that's a really important input. You know, I can have the best demand side reason for wanting to build something, and if Jason isn't excited about it, it's never going to happen. So so I think it's really important for me as I'm not the final decision maker. Like, I need to be really like honest with myself about like what my real inputs are, you know, and where the decision making happens and what all the factors are in that decision making.
All right.
When it comes to actually ranking, like, you know, I use struggle as the rank. So if I've got two things and I don't know which one to do, if I have more struggle from customers with one than the other, then I'll do that thing.
Okay.
And that is a place where we could measure and say, like, I think this is worth doing, and then I might look at the data and it tells me that only 3% of customers do it, and then that kind of invalidated it sort of just destroys my enthusiasm. You know what I mean? Like, okay, I would like to have a bigger impact than that. You know, so that's the way that the data feeds in.
Yeah. So when you try to develop a feature for a specific page within the product, and the data tells you that specific page is only used 1% of the sessions, for example.
Now this is still very tricky, because it may be that it's only used 1% of the time because the wrong thing because it's not doing the right thing. So it could very well be that if we'd made it do the right thing, that this is why we can't. This is why data is bad. Like, data is really bad. Like, what we need actually isn't data. What we need is causality. Causality says, like, when this happens, it's because of this, and when this doesn't happen, this doesn't happen. So the chain of events is causality, and you can't get that out of data. Data can only give you correlations, and like choosing what to shape, choosing what to build is actually a question of theory. It's a question of, what is my model of reality? Like, what do I believe is going to work if I do that in the future? And Clay Christensen has like a lot of really good stuff written about this, like theory, not in the sense of like some complicated fancy explanation, but theory in the sense of like, what do we think is going to happen next when we don't have data about the future? We only have data about the past. Like, so I actually think that the interviews or being in the usage situation, like using it yourself, being in the moment, talking to people who use it, those are the qualitative things where you get the causal model out of that. And then that's the thing I think that should actually drive the decision making.
All right. So I have one topic we didn't touch yet,
Okay.
and that's the way you look at everything else that is not building the product.
Yeah.
So the support team. So you have maybe a
Mm.
first line or a second line of support, maybe a third line of support even. You have an operations team. You have, I think you called it the security infrastructure and performance team.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So what we did the first cycle, and we did it because we wanted everybody to experience a full cycle, is that we put all the developers in the cycle teams.
Yeah.
So also the operations, the people who were responsible for operations.
Yep.
So we experienced that that's not a good idea.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it worked and they delivered great things for the product, but there was always this tension of everything that came across during the cycle that you didn't want to bother them with it. But,
no, that doesn't work. That doesn't work.
That certificate still needs to be replaced, right?
No, it's a different world. So here's the way to think about this. Shape Up is for doing what you decided you wanted to do. It's for top down. It's for steering the product teams where you want them to go. It's for like control, basically. Any team that is reacting to issues is a completely different thing, because by definition, you can't tell a support team what to do for 6 weeks. By definition, their job is to do whatever comes up, and it's unexpected. It's a completely opposite type of work. And so Shape Up is like, how do we organize work for things that we like want to do? And then like at the end of the cycle, we want to ship that thing that we wanted to do. That loop is, that's what Shape Up is about. So what we do at Basecamp is every team in the company is on cycles, but that means very, very little. It only means reporting for the other teams. So the other teams report on the same schedule as the Shape Up teams. And that just makes it, it creates a kind of moment in the whole company where everybody gets kind of updated about what's happening. It also means that you don't have to stop what you're doing because this other team is reporting. It's like everyone is kind of reporting at the same time. I think this has a scale efficiency at the C level to look to manage what's going on, because there's only a certain moment in time to get that update and then make decisions based on it. So this is very effective, but only as a reporting thing, not as a how do we structure the work, not as a planning thing. I don't think that that's very effective.
All right.
Yeah.
So the teams are completely separated. You have an operations team. You have a security team. Okay.
Yes.
And how do you choose what work they are doing?
So they figure that out for themselves. And I know that in the case of ops, there's a mixture depending on what's going on in a company. Sometimes ops will be entirely self-sufficient. They have a manager within the ops team who is directing them. And then it's a mixture of project-driven work and reactive work. And as you know, like when you mix those together, it's just really hard to plan. There are times when David will have a very specific thing that he wants ops to do. And then that will kind of become the mandate. And then there's times when he doesn't have any specific direction for them and they're more doing their own thing. So this kind of depends on what's happening in the company, in the world, in the change of technology. There's a lot of factors there. I don't think that we have any special insight. I certainly don't have any special insight about how to manage a mixture of reactive and project-driven work, within the same team. This is actually something I've been doing a lot of research on lately, because I'm interested in supporting it better in Basecamp. But I can't claim to have any insights yet about like how to structure the way that you go about doing it. Honestly, I think some kind of a Kanban kind of a system is more the way to go.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. And I had a great discussion with it about this with one of the ops, one of the guys who used to do a lot of operations, and he kind of described what you are currently saying. So it's that's good to hear. And I think
one thing they can do is they can shaping always has to happen for any project work, whether you call it shaping or not. And there may be things that they can pick up from the shape up teams about how they go about pursuing their project work. So maybe they could be a little bit more upfront about declaring an appetite instead of just estimating things. Maybe there's ways that they could shape at a higher level before they kind of sort of commit to doing the work, even though they're not betting in terms of cycles. I think there's pieces that they might find helpful, but I'm not sure exactly how they integrate.
Oh, definitely, and especially the creation of a deadline.
Yes.
Because it just forces you to think about what you really want, and skip all the parts where you can end up doing a half-year project.
Yeah, the hard thing there is that it's really hard to measure the deadline when you have reactive work that keeps interrupting you.
Yeah.
For the project teams, they know that 6 weeks means 6 weeks because they don't have anything else that's interrupting them. But if the ops team gets sidetracked with some kind of unexpected problem, now it comes down to kind of almost like counting hours spent on things. And I don't think that you can actually effectively time box. I think you can, but I'm not sure about how big the benefits are of time boxing when you're kind of counting different hours here and there.
Yeah, no, I don't think it. No, I agree.
Yeah.
All right. So, and the same goes for support. So you have support completely separated as well as technical support.
Yes. Yeah. So we basically view technical support and, well, I don't know how to answer that exactly, because I think that some issues that are technical support you would call them ops issues, or they take time from ops. And there's other things that might take time from SIP, but we do have a number of people on the support team who have a certain level of technical proficiency. They can open the console and they can run some scripts that were made for them to deal with sort of common problems, So there's a sort of level of there's a sort of junior technical level that the support can cover that's like really useful. But yeah, they're also just managing. They have a manager who has all of her own systems and everything for how she manages that.
Okay, and so what we encounter in this first cycle is that a lot of knowledge is a lot of specific knowledge is at specific people. So the system is complex, especially the adaptive learning system for students, and the algorithms that are underneath. That knowledge is very limited within the company. So when there are questions from customers about this or problems that are reported, currently we said, okay, yeah, just ask them because they are the only ones who can help you. But you also don't want to interrupt those people within the site. Yeah.
So interrupting. So here, okay, two answers to that. One, on the first order, pinging somebody with a question about something that they know is different than pinging them to asking them to investigate something. Interrupting somebody to talk to them. Okay, yes, it's an interruption, but you're not interrupting them by giving them different work to do. Do you know what I mean? Like if somebody can ask me a question and I know the answer, then that's not work for me. That's an interruption, but it's not work. But if I have to go investigate now that's a new project that's on my plate, even no matter how small, right? So there's a big difference there. So that's one thing. On the second order, this thing about like who is an expert in which part of the system is actually an input to the betting table in terms of when you design who works on what. So you can, the next time, so for example, like we had a billing system, Queen Bee, and we had a few people who were like, especially like Jeff knows everything about Queen Bee. And I remember times in the past when we wanted to do work on Queen Bee and we specifically chose a different programmer to do that project. And we said, okay, like we are willing to adjust our appetite here and say like, we are willing to spend this time with this person doing this work because then we're going to have another person that knows how Queen Bee works.
Yeah. Okay. So okay, so that's a direct way of spreading that knowledge among a bigger group of people, preventing that always the same persons get interrupted for specific questions.
When it comes to system knowledge, I think it's the only way to do it. I think the only way to learn is to work on it, is to build something new in that environment.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
And the other thing is that David has been extremely strict with the whole company about code readability since the beginning. And then this has trickled into the main people, the main senior programmers, and they have kind of reinforced that ethos, or that, I don't know, what do you call it?
Mm-hmm.
Way of thinking. Actually, I think this is a really big factor, because there can still be a lot of confusions about how things work, but the code is so readable that I think it probably reduces the load on learning a new part of the system by probably an order of 10.
Yeah, that's of an enormous help, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So
Yeah, cool.
I was just scanning through the entire list of questions. I think I only have one left. So
Okay.
we have 2 more minutes. I don't know if
sure.
you have anything that you want to ask me.
No, this has been what I wanted to ask you, is what your questions are. So that's that's exactly
Perfect.
it.
Okay.
And also everything in the first half as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, great. So the one thing remaining is, how do you go about releasing the product and testing the thing that you're building in the cycle? Is it all part of the 6 week?
Yeah. So testing is, we are kind of old-fashioned extreme programmers in that way. That the programmers do their own testing, and we have a additional quality assurance person. However, the way that we view QA is that it's not about verifying that the functionality is correct. QA is actually about finding all the weird edge cases that the programmers would never find, and also that we can ship without fixing if we have to. So QA is more about this like extra level of depth and thoroughness that we would like to have, but we don't absolutely have to have. And this QA role came quite late in our growth. We didn't have it for many years, and we're way better because of it. We have far fewer issues across platforms, weird Android versions, stuff like that. And also, Michael, our QA person, has taken a deep interest in accessibility, and he's helped us to improve in a lot of ways there too. But the real testing, in the sense of like the automated tests that get built and that make sure that nothing is broken, the programmers are all writing that stuff themselves. And they do all of that, not only, inside the cycle, they do it like, as they're completing different subscopes of work within the cycle. So that's testing. Yeah. And then the release, release can mean a lot of things. I mean, they can ship anything to production whenever they think it's the right time. And that might be that there's even a piece of it that ships to production midway through the cycle, if they have kind of orthogonal things to build. Or it could mean that they ship it at the very end of the cycle. Sometimes they finish at the end of the cycle, and then they end up shipping like on Tuesday of the first week of cooldown, because it's a better time in terms of the availability of ops and stuff in case something goes wrong. Sometimes they need time to communicate to support what has changed, or write an announcement for the marketing site, or things like that. And we allow that stuff to happen in cooldown. Anything that's not the actual work of like building it, the building has to happen in the cycle, and all of the announcements and communication and stuff, and sort of what do you call it, like ceremony around deployment, that stuff can happen during cooldown.
Yeah. Okay. That makes great sense, and that's kind of what's happening now. So and obviously
it's kind of natural.
Because you write the blog posts around it. You write the automated help desk tickets and the answers, and okay.
And that work also, that work is not very collaborative. You know what I mean? Like the team doesn't need to be like together to write the announcement, or support or whatever. So it's like it happens naturally in cooldown. Yeah. Cool. Well, hey, Ralf, thank you so much for doing this today. I loved like hearing the story of everything that you know, like the different things that you tried and the learning curve and like where the problems came up. This is like super fascinating for me. And I always love kind of going through the questions too, because it helps me to learn, you know, what wasn't clear in the book and what we might explain better in the future. And a lot of times I also don't have the answer. And then it's like the beginning of trying to learn, you know, how to deal with stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, super useful.
Thank you very much. I think this was also very useful for Gynzy as a whole, and a lot of people got their questions answered. So during our conversation, I kind of tried to squeeze them in here and there. So thank you very much for taking time for this.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Have a good one. Take care.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.